Chapter 13, Part 3 of How I Found Livingstone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Anton Epp. How I Found Livingstone. Travels, Adventures, and Discoveries in Central Africa, including 4 months' residence with Dr. Livingstone, by Sir Henry M. Stanley. Chapter 13, Part 3. Our Cruise on the Lake Tanganyika. Exploration of the north end of the lake. The Rusizi is discovered to enter into the lake. Return to Ujiji. The Rusizi River, according to Ruhinga, rose near a lake called Kivu, which he said is as long as from Mugahawa to Mugiri, and as broad as from Mugahewa to Warumashanya's country, or, say, 18 miles in length by about 8 in breadth. The lake is surrounded by mountains on the western and northern sides. On the southwestern side of one of these mountains issues the Rusizi. At first a small rapid stream, but as it proceeds towards the lake it receives the rivers Kagunisi, Kaburan, Mohira, Nyamagana, Nyakagunda, Ruviro, Rofubu, Kavimvira, Moyove, Ruhuha, Mukindu, Sanga, Rubirizi, Kiriba, and, lastly, the Rwanda River, which seems to be the largest of them all. Kivu Lake is so called from the country in which it is situated. On one side is Mutumbi, probably the Utubi of Speck and Baker. On the west side is Rwanda. On the east is Urundi. The name of the chief of Kivu is Kwansibura. After so many minute details about the river Rusizi, it only remained for us to see it. On the second morning of our arrival at Mugahewa, we mustered 10 strong paddlers and set out to explore the head of the lake and the mouth of the Rusizi. We found that the northern head of the lake was indented with 7 broad bays, each from 1.5 to 3 miles broad. That long broad spits of sand, overgrown with matete, separated each bay from the other. The first, starting from west to east, at the broadest part, to the extreme southern point of Mugahewa, was about 3 miles broad, and served as a line of demarcation between Mukamba's district of Ruwenga and Mugahewa of Ruhinga. It was also 2 miles deep. The second bay was a mile from the southern extremity of Mugahewa to Ruhinga's village at the head of the bay, and it was a mile across to another spit of sand which was terminated by a small island. The third bay stretched for nearly a mile to a long spit, at the end of which was another island, 1.25 miles in length, and was the western side of the fourth bay, at the head of which was the delta of the Rusizi. This fourth bay, at its base, was about 3 miles in depth, and penetrated half a mile further inland than any other. Soundings indicated 6 feet deep, and the same depth was kept to within a few hundred yards of the principal mouth of the Rusizi. The current was very sluggish, not more than a mile an hour. Though we constantly kept our binoculars searching for the river, we could not see the main channel until within 200 yards of it, and then only by watching what outlet the fishing canoes came out. The bay at this point had narrowed from 2 miles to about 200 yards in breadth. Inviting a canoe to show us the way, a small flotilla of canoes preceded us, from the sheer curiosity of the owners. We followed, and in a few minutes were ascending the stream, which was very rapid, though but about 10 yards wide and very shallow, not more than 2 feet deep. We ascended about half a mile, the current being very strong, from 6 to 8 miles an hour, and quite far enough to observe the nature of the stream at its embouchure. We could see that it widened and spread out in a myriad of channels, rushing by isolated clumps of sedge and matete grass, and that it had the appearance of a swamp. We had ascended the central or main channel. The western channel was about 8 yards broad. We observed, after we had returned to the bay, that the easternmost channel was about 6 yards broad and about 10 feet deep, but very sluggish. We had thus examined each of its 3 mouths, and settled all doubts as to the Rusizi being effluent or influent. It was not necessary to ascend higher, there being nothing about the river itself to repay exploration of it. The question, was the Rusizi an effluent or an influent, was answered forever. There was now no doubt any more on that point. In size it was not to be compared with the Malagarazi River, neither is it, or can it be, navigable for anything but the smallest canoes. The only thing remarkable about it is that it abounds in crocodiles, but not one hippopotamus was seen, which may be taken as another evidence of its shallowness. The bays to the east of the Rusizi are of the same conformation as those on the west. Carefully judging from the width of the several bays from point to point, and of the several spits which separate them, the breadth of the lake may be said to be about 12 to 14 miles. Had we contented ourselves with simply looking at the conformation and the meeting of the eastern and western ranges, we should have said that the lake ended in a point, as Captain Speke had sketched it on his map. But its exploration dissolved that idea. Chamanti Hill is the extreme northern termination of the western range, and seems, upon a superficial examination, to abut against the Ramata mountains of the eastern range, which are opposite Chamati. But a valley about a mile in breadth separates the two rivers, and through this valley the Rusizi flows towards the lake. Note: after the patient investigation of the north end of the lake, and satisfying ourselves by personal observation that the Rusizi ran into the lake, the native rumour which Sir Samuel Baker brought home that the Tanganyika and the Albert Nyanza have a water connection still finds many believers. Though Chamati terminates the western range, the eastern range continues for miles beyond, northwesterly. After its issue from this broad gorge, the Rusizi runs seemingly in a broad and mighty stream, through a wide alluvial plain, its own formation, in 100 channels until, approaching the lake, it flows into it by 3 channels only, as above described. I should not omit to state here, that though the Doctor and I have had to contend against the strong current of the Rusizi River, as it flows swift and strong into the Tanganyika, the Doctor still adheres to the conviction that, whatever part the Rusizi plays, there must be an outlet to the Tanganyika somewhere, from the fact that all freshwater lakes have outlets. The Doctor is able to state his opinions and reasons far better than I can find for him, and, lest I misconstrue the subject, I shall leave it until he has an opportunity to explain them himself, which his great knowledge of Africa will enable him to do with advantage. One thing is evident to me, and I believe to the Doctor, that Sir Samuel Baker will have to curtail the Albert Nyanza by 1 if not 2 degrees of latitude. That well-known traveller has drawn his lake far into the territory of the Warundi, while Rwanda has been placed on the eastern side, whereas a large portion of it, if not all, should be placed north of what he has designated on his map as Usigi. The information of such an intelligent man as Ruhinga is not to be despised, for if Lake Albert came within 100 miles of the Tanganyika, he would surely have heard of its existence, even if he had not seen it himself. Originally he came from Mutubi, and he has travelled from that country into Mugihewa, the district he now governs. He has seen Mwezi, the great king of Urundi, and describes him as a man about 40 years old, and as a very good man. Our work was now done. There was nothing more to detain us at Mugihewa. Ruhinga had been exceedingly kind, and given us one ox after another to butcher and eat. Makamba had done the same. Their women had supplied us with an abundance of milk and butter, and we had now bounteous supplies of both. The Doctor had taken a series of observations for latitude and longitude, and Mugihewa was made out to be in 3 degrees 19 minutes south latitude. On the 7th December, early in the morning, we left Mugihewa, and rowing past the southern extremity of the Katangara Islands, we approached the highlands of Uashi, near the boundary line between Makamba's country and Uvira. The boundary line is supposed to be a wide ravine, in the depths of which is a grove of tall, beautiful, and straight-stemmed trees, out of which the natives make their canoes. Passing Kanyama-Bengu River, which issues into the lake close to the market ground of Kirabula, the extreme point of Burton and Speck's explorations of the Tanganyika, we steered south along the western shore of the lake for half an hour longer to Kavimba, where we halted to cook breakfast. The village where lived Mruta, the king of Uvira, was in sight of our encampment, and as we observed parties of men ascending and descending the mountains, which much more often than we thought augured good to ourselves, we determined to continue on our course south. Besides, there was a party of disconsolate looking Wajiji here, who had been plundered only a few days before our arrival, for attempting, as the Wavira believed, to evade the honga payment. Such facts as these, and our knowledge of the general state of insecurity in the country, resulting from the many wars in which the districts of the Tanganyika were engaged, determined us not to halt at Kavimba. We embarked quickly in our boat before the Wavira had collected themselves. and headed south against a strong gale, which came driving down on us from the southwest.